Okay, guys, what we told each other was that if one company actually gets an interest or buys shares in another company, and with this buying of shares in another company, it actually gains control over that company. That means that it's a group of companies that's in existence, and that means that we have to compile one set of consolidated financial statements at the end of each financial year for the group as a whole. Now, you can see that there's one crucial word in this whole exercise, and that is the word control. One company must take control or must be able to control another company before a group structure can come into existence and before we are going to compile consolidated financial statements. So the control part of it is extremely important, and there are two sources that tells us exactly what do they mean by control. Now you must be able to differentiate between the two sources, and you must be able to write down for me what is IFRS's definition of control, and then you must be able to write down for me what is the Company Act interpretation of control. They are different but also the same. But the wordings are not the same. The structures are not the same. They want to achieve the same goal, but they are not exactly the same. And you must be able to distinguish between the two of them and also be able to answer a theoretical question between the two of them. Now let's look at control out of the IFRS perspective. We say an investor. Now going back to this one, this is this guy. The guy who's going to buy the shares, the investor. It says if an investor controls an investee. Now the investee is this company whose shares was bought by the investor. It says when an investor controls an investee, if the investor has all of the following. Number one, the investor must have power over the investee. So he must have power over that guy on that side. Then exposure or rights to variable returns from the involvement with the investee. So it says, well, I have bought shares in you. I am actually exercising control over you. It says, and then I have rights or exposure to variable returns as a result of my involvement with you. What kind of returns are we talking about, guys? Well, it can be dividends, it can be a portion of their income, it can be any type of income that is going to earn as a result of his acquaintance with the investee and the fact that he actually controls the investee. It says so exposure or rights to variable returns. That's not to say that he has received it as yet, but he has a right to receive it somewhere in the future. And then the third thing that needs to be present is that the investor must have the ability to use power over the investee to affect the amount of the investor's returns. He must have power over the investee in order to effect the value of the future returns. Now, let's take a simple example. Let's say that the investee, this guy here, well, his original plan was to sell shoes. Then this guy bought the shares in the shoe seller, this guy here. And this guy, through the power that he exercises, the control that he exercises over the investee, he tells him, I've got bad news for you, boy. You're not going to sell shoes. We are going to sell handbags. So forget about your shoes. If that was the main thing, let's say 100% of your sales would have been generated by selling shoes, you are now only going to get 20% of your total proceeds or returns or income or profit from shoes, sales of shoes. 80% you are now going to derive from selling handbags. and that's the end of the story. So let's have a look at that again. It says, I have power over the investee. I can tell him what to do. I have exposure rights to variable returns from the involvement with the investee. Once you're going to sell that shoes, I want my portion of that sales, of that income, that profit as well. I have the right to receive that. He says, and then I have the ability to use my power to affect the amount of the investor's returns. You're going to do 80% shoe sales, handbag sales, boy, and only 20% shoe sales. So I have the power to influence the income that will be generated from that amount of handbags that we're going to sell. The ability to use my power over the investee to affect the amount of the investor's returns. 80% of our returns is going to be from handbag sales. Now, Ifris also goes further and he says, this is a powerful word, power. What do we mean? What is power? And now he gives us a definition of power. He says, power is defined as an existing right that gives the investor the current liability to direct the relevant activities of the investee. Oh, guys, there's a lot of important words in that one sentence. The first one is an existing right. It exists right now. It's not a pie in the sky. It's not something that is going to happen in future, or for that matter, something that happened in the past. It is now. I have the right now. That gives me the current ability now to direct the relevant activities of the investee. And then he goes further and says, but what is relevant activities? And he says, relevant activities are activities of the investee that significantly affect the investee's returns. So I have a right now. I have the ability right now to determine what activities this investee must enter into, which is going to have a significant impact on the bottom line results of that investee. Now, normally, and the easier one of the lot, is by ways of voting rights. Who has voting rights in a company, guys? Shareholders. Does all shareholders have voting rights? No. What shareholders do have voting rights? Our ordinary shareholders. They have voting rights. So if I am the majority shareholder, ordinary shareholder, obviously I can exercise power over the investee. I can have power even if you do not have the voting rights. For example, material influence over decision making of the investee. It says, please, don't just look into this whole thing of power, majority shareholding, voting rights. He says that is obvious. He says, but life is not that obvious. Sometimes you do not have the majority shareholding / voting rights, but through other ways and means, you can have enough power to have a material influence over the decision making of the investee. Now, what is an example of that, for instance? Let's say that I am an important trade partner of you. You're a company you own, I'm a company of my own. But I am very much, we are, let's say, interlinked in our trading activities where I'm using you and you are using me in order for both of us to be profitable. But I'm very dependent on you. I'm dependent on this product that you are going to provide to me. Guys, think about the technology things. I'm just thinking of, what do you call this chip? This Intel chip in your PC. Now, think of all the PCs that's manufactured, and all of them are using this Intel chip, or most of them are using this Intel chip. Now, what will happen if the PC manufacturers can't get the Intel chip? well, then they can overcome that, but it's going to put them backwards for at least, let's say, 6 to 8 months, which they don't want. They're going to suffer severe losses. So I would say if I'm a PC manufacturer, and although I'm not a majority shareholder in whoever is going to manufacture this Intel chip that I'm using in my PC, the fact that I'm actually using, let's say, 80% of the manufactured Intel chips in my PC, I think I can have some power and I can have some say over the Intel chip manufacturer, and I can insist that I must have board representation. Because should they suddenly decide not to manufacture the Intel chips anymore, and I'm totally dependent on Intel chips coming from them, my business model is going to be severely impacted. Now, obviously, I must be a very important client of the Intel manufacturer in order for him to enable me to have board presentation in the first place, and then to have majority board presentation is going to be even worse. So there's an interdependency here, which makes a kind of agreement between these two companies sort of logical. Now, although the PC manufacturer probably doesn't have the majority shareholding, i.e. voting rights, in the chip manufacturer company, the fact that he has majority directors that he has appointed on the board of directors of the Intel chip company makes that he is actually controlling the board of directors of this other company. And if you control the board of directors of a company, what happens now? Who is making the decisions of where the company is going, what the company should do, what is the strategic plan of the company, what remedies should be taken if there are problems? The board of directors guys. So if I'm in control of the board of directors, although I don't have the majority voting right, then it means that I exercise power over that Intel chip company. Very important. So it is not necessary only to have voting rights. There are other ways and means. And each and every situation you must actually go and evaluate on its own to see whether there is power. So if you have power, it doesn't matter by which ways and means, that you can exercise material influence over the decision making of the investee, that company there, that one there, then it means that you exercise power over that investee. Now, let's go and have a look what the Companies Act say about control. The Companies Act say that control is to have the ability to exercise the majority of the voting rights, or to have the control over the exercise thereof. So it's all about the voting rights in the first instance as well. And then it goes and it explicitly states to have the right to appoint or choose the directors of the company that has the majority of the voting rights. Now, that means that voting right is the voting right that the director has on the board of directors. So nothing to do with shares. It is the voting rights of the director. So if I can appoint the majority of the board of directors and all of them have an equal voting right, then it means that I can actually control the board of directors and the decisions that they are making, and therefore I exercise control over the company. It says, and in the third place, all the general voting rights of issued securities of the company is held by or controlled by persons mentioned above. So they have the majority voting rights, or they are controlling the board of directors, or there are other issued securities which is controlled by either one of those two, shareholders or the board of directors, then it means that I exercise control. What is issued securities of the company in plain simple English? Guys, think of the equity section of your statement of financial position. All those items, all your ordinary shares, preference shares, that all forms part of securities issued. All types of preference shares is securities issued. debentures, that is securities issued. So you must have a look at the whole picture to see whether if there's any power that they exercise, if there's any control that they exercise over either one of those three things. Now, what is very important that you should realize that the Companies Act does not dictate that the parent company must have shares in the company, because ownership is not necessary to create a subsidiary relationship. When am I an owner of a company? When I'm an ordinary shareholder. It says it's not necessary to be a shareholder of a company in order to control a company. And when do we have a group of companies? When are we going to do consolidated financial statements? If I control a company. So shareholding is not necessary. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at power. Do I exercise control? Directors, security, voting rights. Can I influence the decision making, the major decision making, which is going to have a direct impact on the returns, the profits that this company is going to make in the future? Can I exercise control over that? Am I in charge of that? Can I dictate what can and what cannot happen? And then there is control, and when there's control, there's a group structure, and when there's a group structure, there's consolidated financial statements. So this is a very, very important slide. Good. Now let's have a look at voting rights. Normally, each ordinary share has one vote. And but it is not that's the usual thing, but there are exceptions, and if it is an exception, in any case, in the memorandum of incorporation, this little umbrellas taking over here. In the memorandum of incorporation, you will see what is the voting rights will be set out as per share. Now, I want to take you back to the Naspers group structure again. The issued share capital of Naspers comprises out of two classes of shares. They have N-class ordinary shares that have one vote per share and are listed on the JSE Stock Exchange. As at 31 March 2020, there are 435 million N ordinary shares in issue. They have one vote per share. They're trading on the JSE, so any person can acquire that share. There are 435 million of them in issue. Then, Naspers also have unlisted A-class ordinary shares. And these shares have 1,000 votes per share, but they have relatively insignificant economic participation. The dividends declared to an A ordinary share, the shares here, are equal to 1/5 of the dividends per share to which an N ordinary shareholder are entitled on. Now I can see, wow, why on earth having this kind of structure? Why on earth will I do something like that? Remember, the N-class shares is traded on the JSE. The A-class shares is an unlisted share, so that is not traded on any stock exchange. Now guys, this is to protect Naspers from any takeovers. Now, you have watched on television or movies or whatever, things like Wall Street and Succession and Billions and heaven knows what else. There are hundreds of these kind of shows. This whole thing of companies who are shopping around to take over other companies for whatever good or bad reason they want to. So, what is the easiest way to take control of a company? And that is to get the majority shareholding, or not necessarily the majority shareholding. If I have 435 million shares in issue out there to millions of shareholders, what do I have to go and do? I have to go and investigate who has the most shares. And if one of those shareholders out there has, let's say, 5,000 shares, that's the most shares, which is % of the total issued share capital. All I have to do is to get a block of shares together, which will give me the majority say in what is going to be decided. So even if I can acquire, let's say, argument's sake, 20% of the total shares of a company like this, the fact that I've got 20% of the shares makes me by far the majority shareholder in that company. And if I am the majority shareholder in that company, obviously I can exercise some influence over the decisions that company is going to take. So therefore, one outside entity cannot come and take up a huge share block in Naspers and then take over control over Naspers in such a way. Because Naspers, actually, if you look at the group structure, looks like this. Kerumstraat City and Naspers Beleggings RF hold A-class shares in Naspers, and together they have 53% of the voting rights in Naspers. So together, never ever, doesn't matter how many shares you are going to accumulate in your own name or in whatever your company's name, you will never be able to have to be the majority shareholder in Naspers, because these two shareholders, which is also part of the group, they are the majority shareholders, 53%. So they protect Naspers from any hostile takeovers that can possibly take place somewhere in the future. So this is actually a very clever way of protecting the Naspers, and then obviously Naspers' 435 million listed shareholders from being taken over by somebody else. Okay, now let's look at a few examples. A Limited has 45% of the equity shares of B Limited. Two other investors has 30% and 25% respectively. Does A Limited control B Limited? So A has 45% in B. More than what the other two investors, B has, let's call them X and Y. X got 30% and Y's got 25%. Yeah, well, A Limited has the most shares. But what will happen if these two shareholders are actually standing together? Then they have 55% of the total voting rights of that company. And A only has 45%. So they can outvote A on each and every decision that A wants to make B Limited take in order to affect that decision. So no, the answer is that A Limited does not control B Limited, because they do not exercise the majority of the shareholding, and they can't exercise the majority of the voting rights of that company. Let's take this one. A Limited has 70% of the ordinary shares of B Limited. X Limited holds 30% of the ordinary shares in B Limited and has the option to acquire half of A's shares. It is not certain that the option will be exercised, so I don't know, but it's not certain. So if we put the structure down here in paper, it looks like this. A Limited has got 70% in B Limited. So clearly B Limited is a subsidiary of A Limited. But now we've got this outside horse here, X Limited. X Limited only has 30% of B Limited. So without any further information that it also exercises power over the board of directors or something to that effect, B Limited does not seem to be a subsidiary of X Limited, because they are not a majority shareholder. Now what about this one? X Limited has the potential control over 50% of the voting shares in A Limited. So is A Limited now a subsidiary of X Limited, and therefore the group structure being X, A, and B, with X being the holding company or the parent company? Now guys, before you jump to a conclusion and before you actually scratch your head and before you do anything, let me refer you back to what is power. Power is defined as the existing right that gives the investor the current ability to direct the relevant activities of the investee. Relevant activities are activities the investee that significantly affect the investee's returns. So, number one, does X Limited have an existing right which gives them the current ability to direct the relevant activities of A Limited? Just get there. No, they only have a potential right, not an existing right. Can they, as at now, exercise any control over the day-to-day activities of A Limited or over the decisions that A Limited wants to make? No. They've got the potential to do it somewhere in the future, but now, at this point of time, can they do that? No, guys, they can't. So is X Limited the holding company or parent company of A Limited? No, they are not. A Limited is the holding company of B Limited, there's no doubt about that. But X Limited at this point of time is only what it is, the outside walls, without being the parent of anybody at this point of time.